I have to say, this movie has the best use of a Chekhov's gun that I've ever seen, because if you have a pregnant woman in the first act, well, if you know, you know. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well. I am so freaking excited because I am here to review the latest movie in the Alien franchise. This one, Alien Romulus by Fede Alvarez. Directed by Fede Alvarez, I should say. I am so excited to talk about this movie. I have quite literally just gotten out of the theater and I have so many thoughts about this movie. I did not think I was going to be talking about this movie, but frankly, I'm just going to be upfront about it. I loved this movie, and yet I've already gotten into a few arguments with friends that I saw the movie with, and even a couple of friends of mine online, whose opinion that I deeply respect, but I actually really disagree with some of their thoughts on this movie, even though I respect the opinion. I think I understand where it comes from, and I just want to explain why, because frankly, at the end of the day, I adored this movie, and I have a different view on some of the sort of points of contention that people have with this movie, and frankly, think it's probably one of my favorite movies in the Alien franchise in a long time. And that is actually saying something, because before we get to the movie itself, I am a huge fan of the Alien franchise. I am of the opinion that there are better and worse Alien movies, but I don't think there's a necessarily bad one in the bunch. Alien 3, I think, is a bit nihilistic, and Alien Resurrection is if you made an Avengers movie, an Alien movie, which isn't good, but, you know, it's the Joss Whedon effect of it all, because that movie was written by Joss Whedon. It's a weird vibe for an Alien movie. It's fine on its own. And I am a huge defender of Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Those movies are not good movies. I will not defend them as, like, they're strong, like, structurally sound films, but the ideas in them and the philosophy that it wants to explore and some of the concepts and things that it tries to do, I really, really respect, and would much rather have more sci-fi films like that than a lot of the, like, studio mandated kind of schlock that we've been getting over the past few years. So I really do appreciate what those movies are trying to do, and frankly, if you liked what those movies are trying to do, go watch Raised by Wolves on HBO Max, another fantastic show, and was definitely Ridley Scott excising his, like, demons, trying to, like, deal with some of the stuff he wanted to talk about in those two films in that show, just without the xenomorphs. Anyways, I say all of that to kind of talk, because I think that context is necessary for Alien Romulus, because coming into this movie, I think the conversation has really been about how the Prometheus and Alien Covenant films really, just as pieces of entertainment, didn't necessarily work on a big mass budget scale. As much as, like, sci-fi nerds like myself really kind of do have appreciation for them, on the whole, they are not great films. And so this was a movie that felt like it was going back to the very basics of the Alien franchise. And I think a lot of people hearing that kind of went into the film, and I even myself was very worried about it, seeing some of the trailers, that this was just going to be a retread or a nostalgia bait or just a remixing of the original Alien films, like Alien and Aliens. And right down to the fact that the aesthetic of the, like, CRTVs and the old style graphics were being used, and the very, like, tactile look from the original film was pervasive throughout this, and also that it going into a very small scale, like, claustrophobic setting, like, again, the first film. And I think that is a very real fear to have with this film. I mean, look at, like, a bunch of studio mandated, like, films where they're just sort of like, oh yeah, this franchise, let's just resurrect it again and do the same thing that worked before, because these big idea things from really, auteur filmmakers, again, auteur is a whole different thing, but, like, auteur filmmakers didn't work, so let's just go back and let's get like a director who will just make us like a studio mandated film. And I think that could have really been the mindset here. But what I really appreciate director Alvarez doing with this movie is it does have a lot of what I would call homage to the original films, and yet every single time that there is a scene that is similar to the original Aliens films, it has a new contextualization. I'm gonna have to go into full spoilers in just a second here, so I'll try and keep it general for just a minute longer. But I need to talk full spoilers about this film to talk about some of my big things and my big disagreements with sort of the overriding pervasive thoughts on the film. But just staying focused, like, we know that there's gonna be a chestburster scene in this film, and the when I saw the trailers, I'm like, oh, they're just gonna redo the original chestburster scene from the original movie. It's not gonna have the same tenseness and what's about to happen feel to to it, and yet this movie plays on that in a fun way where we know a chest-bursting scene is going to happen. It's just a matter of when and how and what it causes our characters to do. And I really like that the film recontextualized that moment in a really fun way that made it feel pertinent to this film. Like, as a fan of the franchise, I could sit and be like, oh, this is kind of similar to that, but it works on its own. And I think the biggest test of that for me was my fiance came with me to the movie, and she has not really seen any of the Alien movies. I think she's seen Prometheus, doesn't remember it very well, and then a couple, just a few scenes from the original Alien movie, but not really the franchise on its own. And throughout the whole movie, she was really riveted and bought every section of the film. And my big issue, and I'll talk about some specifics in just a moment, but leading into this, the big issue with nostalgia bait in films, for me, is that when movies do nostalgia bait, they are just referencing a something from older works without doing the work to make them pertinent to this film, and just hoping that the reference itself will cause enough emotional weight and carry enough emotional weight that it will that will be meaningful on its own. And what that does is it always necessarily dilutes the moment that you're in right now with your characters in the film, to go like, hey, look, it's this character from this other movie, like, hey, look, it's a Star Trek character, a Star Wars character, or an Avengers character from that other movie. You're instantly thrown out of the movie that you're watching and are thinking about that other thing that you loved before. And yes, there's a nice, quick cheap emotional grab there, but it doesn't, it throws you out of this movie and the stakes of this film because you're thinking about another movie and another emotion that you're feeling at another time. This movie, however, I really do feel that anytime that there's a reference to another piece of Alien media, and by the way, I will say some of the references that it makes to other Alien franchise media are not the ones that you would typically expect. I'll talk about that in just a second, but it makes some weird references. But even then, it does so in a way that still feels like it's telling this movie's story and isn't trying to distract from what this movie was trying to tell. So much so that if you know nothing about the other films, like my fiance does, she wasn't really distracted outside of one particular moment from being invested in this world. And I think the best way to explain that, and this is going to be full spoilers here, is with a character they choose to bring back. So jump off here if you don't want any discussion of this, but they bring back the character of Rook, who is the android character from the first movie. Now, that android was killed, and the android we deal with here is another version of that same model. And what I liked about the appearance of him here is that this movie is very much trying to discuss thematically how the company views people as disposable and is willing to just use people and get rid of them as it so wants for its own ends, and how companies sort of just view people as products and just resources to use. That is very much going back to the original Alien, though I think it evolves this in a fun way. I'll talk about that in a second. But focusing on Rook, bringing him back and having him be sort of the main company antagonist of the film does two things thematically. One, it reminds us of oh, okay, this is the character from the other movie, but he's another version here, and we saw that character get killed, and this version of this movie is half destroyed, and we see he is just a disposable thing. These androids are just disposable people, and the fact that there's so many of the same model and they just constantly get killed and used, it kind of speaks to just the fact that it just visually speaks to that idea of the company viewing people as disposable. And also the fact that he is still in this movie working as a company man, even though we've seen him be destroyed 2 different times, how he's willing to just give up everything as this stupid little middle manager asshole. Yes, an android, but is just willing to constantly work for the company even though it kills him. And I really thought that the use of that character, I see people seeing that character and thinking, oh, he's a nostalgia bait reference in the film. But I think it actually goes to the themes of the movie very well. And I think it not using that character actually would have made the impact of an antagonist in that role less powerful, because I think it fits the movie's themes. That being said, there are a few choices throughout the film that I do think are leaning into either nostalgia bait that are a bit on the nose, or they are evocative of things that people are put off of when it comes to nostalgia bait. The overt one, when I'm sort of talking about that, is is the fact that they do use CGI to recreate Rook's face, and they kind of focus on it a lot. There's a lot of points throughout the film where Rook is kind of on a TV screen and things like that, and I'm sort of like, okay, he's on a screen, you can kind of hide the CGI-ness, but there are moments early on in the film where they really just focus on his face, and they do the Rogue One, like resurrecting the dead, like Luke Skywalker thing from Mandalorian, and you can just tell it's fake. It's not even as good as this Disney money stuff that they usually do, because I know Disney still runs Fox, but it feels like they have less money here to do that, and it doesn't look as good. And I'm just like, when you do this, it makes sense to just focus less on that character's face, but they just go full into it. And while I do think the character makes sense in this movie, like if I was writing this as a book or a video game where CGI recreation wasn't going to be a factor that I had to care about, the character makes sense to have here. It's just the focusing on his character fully and completely and the reminding us of how much has been used by like Disney and Star Wars and other franchises, like, oh, look, it's that character from that thing, in a nostalgia-baity way. It's trained audience to have that reaction to it. And I don't think that that's how this character is being used, but the fact that they film it in a similar way does evoke that. And so that, I think, is part of why people are like, oh, nostalgia bait. That being said, there are a couple moments where I do think that does come up. There's one moment where the other android character in this movie, who I really love, and he kills a xenomorph, saving his sister, and he says, stay the hell away from her. And then there's a pause, and I'm like, oh, he's referencing the original movie. And then he says, you bitch. And I hated the you bitch line, because that is the original line from Aliens that Ripley says to the alien queen xenomorph. And I don't mind vague references. Like, there's actually even a couple from Rook where he says a few lines from the original movie that are very similar to those lines, but they still work within the context of this movie. The stay away from her line is pushing it, but it fits his character. Like, you would say stay away from her, he would have an emotional reaction, but the added of you bitch, that character hadn't really articulated like swearing or the fact that the xenomorphs had been like feminized as like a bitch in any way. And so the you bitch line there, it really just does feel like, oh, we're calling back to Ripley's line, which does throw me out of the film. So I'm not saying this movie is immune to that, but it is less than I would have thought this movie would do. The other elements of references that I really do like is they do in the middle of the film, again, full spoilers here, reference the Prometheus films. There's a whole section where they have a MacGuffin towards the end of the film that leads to one of the end sequences of the movie that I really love, that is all built on stuff from Prometheus and to a lesser extent Alien Covenant. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that they are connecting those, that they're not just disregarding them, that they do come back in. Maybe that's evidence of Ridley Scott being an executive producer on this movie, but I'm glad that they are still pertinent and they're not tossing those ways, because again, even though those movies aren't great, I have a lot of respect for them and what they tried to say and do. Again, watched Raised by Wolves. And so them bringing that in, I loved. And then the movie also makes other fun references like to the Alien Colonial Marines games, the Alien Isolation games. Like, there are literally like the save points from Alien Isolation, like the phones, throughout this movie. And that was directly intentional. Like, the director did an interview talking about how he did that intentionally to reference the movie and how reference the game, and how the game was, it inspired him to remind him that aliens could be creepy in a modern setting. And I thought that those were like homages that didn't pull you out of it, but felt like part of the world, and makes Alien Isolation, the game, better itself, because it feels like, oh, these phone things are like just a part of the grammar of the world. Like, it felt like a good homage, but never felt like it tore away from the movie to be like, oh, look, it's the phone. You remember that? Other elements, I've been talking about like the overall nostalgia-based context and conversation about the movie here, but I want to talk more about the film itself on its own terms. I thought that this was a really wonderfully characterized and taught film that really honed in on the themes from the original Alien movie and explored them in slightly different ways, enough so that the film feels justified and it's not retreading. It doesn't go so far as like explore bigger ideas or expand the mythos in a huge way like the Prometheus or Alien Covenant movies do, but at least it feels like, okay, we're going to be saying something similar to but slightly different to the original movie. And I really did like that, because we start off the movie with, basically, as the director himself is sort of related to his own experience living from countries that have been colonialized, imperialized. We have a group of kids who have just become like just toil towards the machine of Weyland-Yutani. They're trying to get off this world, and yet they're not even able to ever make the quota that they need to get off of it. They're always going to be stuck in this system as just workers. And they dream of a better world. They dream of trying to get off of it, and that's what sets up the plot of them going to the space station to try to get the cryotubes. And I thought that that was just such a great way to sort of build out the world of Alien, because in the original film we have our main characters sort of being workers for Weyland-Yutani, but in this film sort of pulls it out and says, like, look at how everyone is treated in this system, and how the company really just does not view anyone as people, not just the androids, but the actual workers for it. And they're just cogs in a machine, just constantly stuck in there and never going to be let out from it. They are promised things that they're never going to get. And what I also really loved is in the middle of the film, we do go that Prometheus backstory stuff where the Rook explains, like, oh, we were studying aliens to make the perfect organism, evolve humans to become the perfect organism. Two things stand out there. One, Rook is saying, like, humans should be that way. And it's like, dude, you're an android. You should think better of yourself. And it reminds me of David's character from Alien Covenant Prometheus, being like, Michael Fassbender wanted androids to be able to be the creator, not just the creation. And he was willing to sacrifice humans to do that. And Rook is sort of the flip side of that coin, where he is someone who's just willing to give up his entire self to, like, praise be that my creators, the humans, they should be the ones that are evolved. So I loved that idea. But then also all the things that he references as, like, reasons that humans should be evolving. Like, they have this backstory of Weyland-Yutani wants to evolve humanity because we've terraformed these planets and yet humans keep dying. But the reason that human keeps dying that he mentions are things caused by the company, like humans dying in mining accidents. And you can tell from that it's not that humans can't survive on other planets that have been terraformed. It's that humans are not meant to survive in conditions that this company creates specifically for its workers. And they are not trying to evolve humanity. They're trying to make better workers. They're trying to make stronger eugenicized workers to be able to do, to just fill more for the company role. And I thought that was very subtly there, but it was there. And I thought that was such a cool idea and a way to expand this. And we also get to explore it, too, with this relationship between our main characters. I forget their name, but we have the android character and our lead sort of, like, Ripley-like character, this girl. I'm always bad with names of characters in movies, so apologies. So that's not a problem with the characters. I remember them very evocatively. I'm bad with names, as is clear throughout many videos of mine. But we have our two lead characters, and the main contention between them is this idea of, like, does she view him as a person or not? And she does clearly love him and care for him, but she's willing to give him up so she can have a better life, as we learn. And it's her viewing him as slightly less than. And the movie's about her coming to terms with, like, no, he is just as much a person as her. And I love this evolution of the idea of androids, because I don't think Bishop kind of, but most of the android characters of the Alien franchise have not been treated as full people. Either they've been company men, which kind of fits the android character for that, as, like, company men not being full people as an alien. Bishop kind of gets humanized. David kind of wants to become the creator, but there's an equality here between these two that I think it's just really beautiful, and I love that she calls him her brother. The other aspect of it is I do think there's, like, some good racial commentary just subtly in the film, where we have Rook telling the android character, the main android character, that, like, oh, you're the android that built this whole company. I respect you. And you get the impression that, like, this model built on the image of a black man was used to, like, physically build this company. And you can see the slavery connotations just kind of implicit in that are still kind of referenced by the whole way Weyland-Yutani is set up now. And just, that's kind of smart and subtle commentary that's not overt and in your face, like, this is about race, but it does hint at that in a very subtle, smart way, that I really loved. Also, I haven't even talked about, like, these are just all the ideas in the movie. The actual horror and sequences here are fantastic. Like, this wasn't the scariest film of all time. It'd be hard to remake an alien movie that is super scary, considering we know how the aliens work. Like, a lot of the horror of the original movie was like, what is happening here? And we kind of know the rules here. But the body horror and different set pieces this movie sets up escalate the stakes wonderfully. Like, we learn that, like, the alien was waiting for them to open the door, and it just sitting there for a minute, smartly. When they walk into the next area of the space station, there's like a whole, that we learn that there's actually a shit ton of the xenomorphs, also fantastic. It just consistently raised the stakes, and the sound design and visuals, like, are just always setting up to be like, oh man, this feels really bad. And I loved that. The shots also were beautiful. I think there's some really meticulously done, like, miniature work. I believe the director, he reached out to, like, the original Alien team to rebuild some of the practical effects, and it shows. Just some of the miniature and practical work on this whole film is so good. I was astonished. And also some of the CGI work of, like, going into space you felt the weight of it and the physicality of it that, you know, a lot of space movies nowadays, especially from big franchises, feel like, space is fine, we can go up there. Like, you feel the weight of going into space. And I saw this in Dolby Atmos. Highly recommend that if you can, because the sound design in this movie feels so good when you're in it. And you just feel space. And in an Alien movie, that's something I really, really constantly want, and you don't always get that in some of the other, like, some of the later films. I felt space in this movie, and it really felt big, expansive, and terrifying. The first shot of the movie, I think, sells that really well. Loved that. I also loved just some of the, speaking on that front, I also loved some of the imagery we got, like some of the shots of space at the end when we do get the human xenomorph, which I'll talk about in a second, are simply gorgeous. And yes, my nerd brain is like, okay, a asteroid field wouldn't be that condensed that it would, like, blow up a space station and everything. But regardless, that's a whole other issue. That's in all types of films that deal with space. But the moment where she's, like, climbing back into the ship, and you see this, like, little hole amongst this, like, cloud of debris and things, like, gorgeous, just simply gorgeous. But this brings me down to the human xenomorph. What a great ending for that. Like, as soon as I saw, like, there's a pregnant woman and she's injecting herself with a thing from Prometheus, like, we're gonna get some human xenomorph nonsense, and this movie delivered. It was so creepy and weird and felt very much like the what was it, the necromorphs? I forget what they're called, the aliens from Dead Space. I forget what they're called, but they look creepy. I love those things. And this guy kind of has that same sort of vibe, but, like, also, like, Slender Man-y kind of creepy, long, elongated style to him. It was just so weird, and you get ideas of, like, he wants his mom, but he's also willing to kill his mom. And just at the end where he, like, falls on her, that, like, jump scare admittedly got me, was so good. Just took the movie to a whole new level for me, because I was like, oh, this is great. And it's so much better in design than the alien at the end of, I think Alien Resurrection was the one we also got a kind of alien-human hybrid, a xenomorph-human hybrid there, where we had, like, its brain sucked out through the back of that window. That one just felt like a big gooey guy. This feels like a weird-ass creature in this movie, and I love that. So, adored all of that. The only other negative I will give this movie is there's a couple moments where characters make dumb decisions. They're justifiable enough that it's not like characters making dumb choices in a horror movie where I'm like, oh my god, why would you ever make that choice? But it does come close to that a couple of times, such as the silent sequence where they're trying to sneak past the face huggers. And the guy starts talking to help this other girl. And it's like, I can buy that, like, she's about to die, so he's willing to try and risk it to be able to save her. And he actually does lead to her being saved temporarily. But it does feel like one of those, like, no, man, don't talk. That's a bad move. And one other aspect of this movie that I almost ran into problematic territory to me, but I liked it, is the main android character. Again, I'm terrible with names. Apologies. He is neurodivergent coded at the top of the film. It has definitely coded as, like, some form of autism. Again, it's having to do with his programming, and that he's kind of a malfunctioning AI, but he's definitely coded as having some form of autism. And then when they put in the company chip into him, he gets kind of cured of autism, and he's like, I speak like this now. And there was an element to me, especially hearing a lot as an autistic person who does hear a lot of, like, cure autism rhetoric that you hear from, like, Autism Speaks and that sort of eugenicist language. Seeing that in a movie, especially with a character they're supposed to like, I was like, man, I don't really like the kind of cure autism vibe. It's like it fits the world of this story, but the things that it's referencing kind of has weird implications for me. However, it ends up working for me because the movie tries to show that version of him is not really him and is kind of dehumanizing him for the company, and the company sort of changing him as like, this is the thing that we value, and our main character doesn't value him as that sort of like company man guy. She values him for who she loved, and her brother, and the neurodivergent coded one. And I think that is a really beautiful message within that. Like, you can argue of this idea that it's even possible to cure autism in any way, shape, or form is still something awkward to even lean into, even in a coded metaphorical way, and I can agree with that. But I think ultimately in the day, it's distant enough from being exactly one-to-one, but still having enough of the positive message that it works for me. But I can also understand it rubbing a few people the wrong way and not liking that. But for me, it ultimately ends up working in a way that I do enjoy and think fits the themes of the film in a good way. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I really do think that this is a fantastic film. Like I said, I understand people's views of this being nostalgia bait because it does lean in towards some aspects of that style of filmmaking. Sometimes overtly so, and it does have a few moments of the nostalgia bait in one-off sequences, but I really do think that this falls more into homage in a way that evolves the themes, adds to those themes, explores different ideas of like humans and androids being equal and being equally real in a way that is different from the other films, and yet still feels in line with those other films' themes. It does not hit the highs of Prometheus and Alien Covenant in terms of their big philosophical ideas. Like, it's not aiming as high as those films, but I think that ultimately is to the film, like, this film on its own terms is benefit and makes for a much tauter, leaner, scarier, more interesting in terms of its own, structure film that I really, really love. And honest to God, I doubt a studio would accept this pitch, but honestly, frankly, where I would love to see this go is at the end of the movie, she's put into cryosleep. The two of them are put into cryosleep, and who's to say they don't run into David in his ship at the end of Alien Covenant. That would be an interesting next step for the film if they could get Michael Fassbender back for that. Now, I don't know if any executive at Fox would be at all interested, or Disney, in continuing the Alien Covenant storyline. But frankly, if this does well enough, I think you could justify it. And both reviews have been decent enough, and the box office, as sitting here on Friday night, seems like it's doing well enough that they could be justified. So, yeah, I loved Alien Romulus, and I think it's fantastic. I might make a more structured video at some point about it on my main channel because I frankly really loved this film. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Beyond all of that, my friends, I hope y'all live long and prosper.